Hello, I'm Amanda Walker, and welcome to Inside America, the show that brings you insight and analysis of the biggest issues facing the United States right now. In today's episode, we are just days away from what's being called the most consequential US election in a generation. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have been hitting the battleground states hard as they make their final pitch to voters in the sprint to November 5th. It's still too close to call in the critical swing states.
I'm looking for a job.
In this moment, our country is at a crossroads, and where we go from here is up to us.
None of this is looking straightforward as Donald Trump continues to say that if he doesn't win, he won't accept the result, and voters are braced for delays. On the day counts of mail-in ballots might mean that we won't know the winner on election night. Coming up, we discuss the global implications as the rest of the world watches and waits.
Diplomacy, foreign policy, a lot of the conflict zones we're seeing right now in the world and how they would handle that. So I think there's anxiety, definitely globally for that.
And we speak to voters in that swingiest of states, Pennsylvania.
And she'll win, and then the country will be going to hell in the handbasket.
I'm afraid it's going to be rough, bad. A lot of fighting, maybe even shooting.
Now, US election campaigns are usually pretty eventful, but this one has been particularly dramatic. Let's take a look at what's happened so far.
This is a pivotal moment between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
Take a look what happened.
When they took a shot at my hero, enough was enough! And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother!
Let us choose honor and let us choose joy.
Let us write the next great chapter in the most extraordinary story ever told. Thank you.
She was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black.
People start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets. Come here. Take over, Eli. Just take over.
Hi, everyone.
So we are entering the home stretch, and this is gonna be a tight race until the very end. What a ride, and it's not over yet. To try and make sense of it all, I sat down with Amy Dacey. She is the executive director of the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics at American University. She's advised Barack Obama and Senator John Kerry, so she's seen her fair share of elections. And I started by asking her if this one is as consequential as people say.
Well, I've been doing this for a while, so I will say yes until the next one. I mean, they are all very important, but I think the striking contrast between the candidates at the top of the ticket, these slim margins in our House and Senate races, it really is all eyes are watching.
So when you look at the big issues that both parties have really been campaigning on, let's take immigration, for example, and abortion, how effective do you think each campaign has been in hammering their messages home?
Well, I think what you've seen is the abortion issue really came to light when Roe v. Wade was overturned. it had a stark election, consequence for Republicans in the 2022 midterm election, and I think you saw it firsthand. It's still a very salient issue. As we predicted, there would be more restrictive behavior within the states as the power moved down to the states. We've also seen some ballot measures in some of our states, with citizens actually trying to put this on the ballot. So I think it'll be very relevant. I think it's also spread beyond abortion in a lot of senses. It's conversations around birth control, around IVF. This affects women and their families on a broader scale. And so I think that's a top, of the mind issue. Immigration is also certainly something that Republicans are trying to drive. In some senses, it's been weaponized to be a wedge issue in a lot of communities, not only at the border or talking about, but in the economy. I mean, the Vance and Trump ticket call it, migrant crime. So I think it's been really trying to be used as a scare tactic, in this campaign. And oddly enough, when a solution was presented, a bipartisan solution in our United States Congress, it was rejected by the Trump-Vance ticket for political reasons. So these are issues that are definitely a hotbed, front of the conversation, ones that you see. The economy, though, will really pave the way.
Right, exactly. And that's very often seen as the thing that is going to decide an election. But it's complex, isn't it? Because if you look at it from the kind of macro level, you've got decent growth, you've got record highs for the stock markets. But then on that more ground level, you have people struggling with groceries, with rent, inflation. Could that be, has that been communicated well enough by the Biden administration as to why this is happening, and could it ultimately be their downfall?
Well, this is not a new, phenomenon. Economic issues, those we call them kitchen table issues, are always the ones at the forefront. It's how people know that they can afford the things they need, how they can provide for their family, how they can have a good well-being. And so these are always, top of the mind issues. Now, oftentimes if you're the incumbent in power, it's challenging because you are the one who holds that, the economic message and the decisions that you're making. But I think in a lot of respects as well, there's been a lot, as you said, done on the federal level, big boisterous packages, whether it's the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. The challenge is you have to take that information, those big seemingly numbers, and break them down so communities understand how they're being effective. So, if you're in some of these key counties in these battleground states, people really need to articulate to them about how is it helping improve your community and your well-being and what other things are on the way. I think the other thing is what is happening now, but what are some of the investments being made so that your future will be better looking forward.
And another potential challenge for Harris is a third-party candidate. You've got Jill Stein. Can you just explain to our viewers how much of an obstacle that might be and how much that might impact her?
Well, in U.S. elections, that two-party system, we really do have the two major parties that are fighting it out. But when you have a third-party candidate like a Jill Stein, like we saw in 2016, she got 1 million votes nationally. But when you look at some of these key states where she was on the ballot, there's a certain number of votes that if they went to either candidate could have, really changed that election. These battleground states, a lot of them are 10,000, 5,000 vote difference. So if there's third-party candidates, we see in Georgia there's a few third-party candidates, whether or not Kennedy is on the ballot as a third party, and some he got off and others, but he's on. It also creates this fracturing. Where are these votes going to go, and are you taking them more from the Trump side or from the Harris side? So in some of these razor-thin margin races, having a third-party candidate on the ballot in U.S. elections can really have an impact.
And I know you've been traveling outside of America recently. The world is watching with anticipation for this huge election. What have your observations been?
Well, it is humbling to know that our system can affect so many others and decisions that are being made. I think there is certainly there's a very stark difference. And a lot of times in the U.S. elections, people aren't making decisions on foreign policy necessarily. It is really those personal checkbook issues. But what you're seeing globally is that there's two very different styles about how these candidates want to approach diplomacy, foreign policy, a lot of the conflict zones we're seeing right now in the world and how they would handle that. So I think there's anxiety definitely globally for that. But at home, I think you also see this is two very distinct, different leadership styles. And while people might not vote on specific foreign policy issues, they see them as handling our position, the U.S. position, the world very differently.
Amy Dacey there. So much at stake for the US and for the rest of the world. But it all comes down to what happens in those few key swing states. all eyes are on Pennsylvania. We headed to York County to speak to voters. Pennsylvania, the center of the US political universe. How this state votes next month will likely decide the next president of the United States. The polls have Donald Trump and Kamala Harris essentially tied. Every last vote will count. At the South Central York County Senior Center, votes have already been cast, on this occasion, for the homecoming king and queen. Seniors from across the county gather here for food, friendship, and fun, and for a bit of an escape to the good old days. Underneath the enjoyment, everyone knows that something big is looming. Gloria, you are a mover, clearly. Are you a voter?
Yes, I am.
Are you looking forward to this election being over?
Yes, I am.
What's it been like living in a swing state?
It's very annoying, really, because there's so many ads, and you just hear the same ones over and over and over.
Do you think it's going to be a peaceful transfer of power?
No, I don't. I'm afraid it's going to be rough, bad. A lot of fighting, maybe even shooting. You know, it's hard to say, really, but I think it's going to be rough, whichever one wins.
If this room were to decide the election, there'd be one clear winner.
I'm definitely for Donald Trump.
Why?
Because he had us going in the right direction, and Biden just screwed everything up.
What if Trump loses?
Well, then she'll win, and then the country will be going to hell in a handbasket. They let all these foreigners in, and they've given them everything. I mean, and if they get the vote, they're going to vote for her because Biden let everybody in.
Trump's alarmist message on immigration really resonates here.
It's fear. It is fear
Of the unknown.
of the unknown, correct. It's been 3 years of nothing being done. The illegals coming into here, being a senior, they're going to take up medical. They got children. The children have to go to school. They need an interpreter. It's just too much.
The nostalgia of the Make America Great Again message has also transferred to Trump's presidency.
I felt like I had money. I was walking around while he was president thinking, gosh, I have no problems. I have plenty of money. Everything is going good. There are no wars. There's no...
That's how you felt when he was president?
Yes.
And what about when Biden became president?
He immediately opened the borders, started the wars.
So which way do you think this election's going to go?
For Trump. Unless they steal it.
Of all the homecoming dance attendees, we could only find one who's planning to vote for Harris. Have you decided who you're voting for?
Definitely not Trump.
Not Trump. Why?
It's not for the people. It's for the rich. Yeah. No, I wouldn't. No.
And how do you feel about Kamala Harris?
I think she would do a good job.
Downstairs in the sewing club, they're making dolls for the victims of recent hurricanes. For the sake of friendships, there's a rule here that no one discusses politics. But Marge feels so strongly against Trump that she agrees to speak to us outside.
I'm a blue dot in a sea of red.
Is that how it feels?
Yes, it does. I can't understand people accepting the lies and the character of this person who professes to be a religious person who is anything but.
And these are very often your friends and family, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah. I have family members that I can't talk to about it, and we have this pact that if we want to get along, we can't discuss that. Do you feel the same way?
I do. It disturbs me that people think it's okay to have a man that has been accused of rape, but he's a good guy.
We're so close now to this election.
How does it make you feel?
Sick. I'm just worried to death. I can't imagine Trump, another 4 years of him.
Back upstairs, after a bit of confusion, last year's homecoming king is quick to cede power to a new king.
Hail, hail!
This year's winners are announced without objection. The same will not be said for November's election result. With just days to go, people can only cling to the hope that things will go their way.
So the nation is split at this point. One half of the country is going to be left very disappointed with the result. Which half? Let's discuss with our panel, Republican strategist and commentator John Feary and Orson Porter, a political strategist who worked on Bill Clinton's campaign. So much swirling around this election, so many issues from women's healthcare, inflation, immigration, foreign wars. Orson, what issue do you think will ultimately be the thing that this election is decided on?
Well, it started on the kitchen table. It will remain on kitchen table issues, and I think the candidate, as we close out, who speaks to voters directly about how the kitchen table issues affects their daily lives, will come across the finish line, the victor.
John, what do you think? We hear so much, don't we, about inflation. That's the word I'm hearing from all the voters that I speak to. Is that going to be the thing that people are voting on?
It typically is. It typically is, as Orson says, the kitchen table issues, inflation being the number one thing. I would say that if you look at all the lists of issues that people care about, it's inflation, immigration, but the one issue that I can't really decide how important this is going to be is abortion. Because if abortion is the issue for women voters, Republicans are going to be in trouble. And we knew that from 2022 and 2020, it'll be 2024 and 2020. If, on the other hand, it's other issues, then the polling will be, if these issues, I think Republicans will be in good shape. It's hard to tell the polls, because the polls were right in 2018 and 2022, and they were completely wrong in 2016 and 2020. So it all depends which polls you have the faith in. I have faith that Trump's going to win, but Orson probably has faith that Harris is going to win. And so, to your point, half the country is going to be disappointed because both halves think they're going to win.
So abortion, women's health, there's been a big gender divide in this election, hasn't there, Orson?
It has, and I was just in Wisconsin last week, and the issue of transgender rights was big, playing up in commercials in Wisconsin. And to the point of what issues, economy is always number one, but it's those wedge issues that particularly the Republicans are trying to speak directly to male voters that are being played out in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and other states. So it isn't always the most important issue like the economy. It could be issues that bubble up like that become bigger issues the last 2 weeks of the campaign.
Yeah, and the whole sense of nostalgia that the Trump campaign is really built on, make America great again, take us back to the good old days. I've been hearing from voters a similar thing about his presidency. You know, they will literally say to me, when he was president, I had more money, I was walking around, there were no wars, I had no troubles. I mean, ultimately, is that sense of nostalgia going to be a big boon for Trump?
It definitely helps Trump a lot. The idea that people kind of look at his time in office and they think good thoughts about the economy. You know, this is very interesting. It's a very, very complicated election because typically you have elections that are a continuity election that people run on peace and prosperity, or a change election. And we have this change in Harris. She's obviously a change candidate in the way she looks and her gender, but she's also represents a continuity campaign. And she's never been able to answer the question how she's going to change things from Biden. Trump, on the other hand, is saying, let's go back to the future, kind of like that old movie. You know, I had this great time and I can do it again. But, you know, knowing Trump, he kind of gets himself, he wanders off in all kinds of different directions. If we're just, let's talk about my tenure, it would be easy, but he's pretty hard to discipline on the campaign trail, and he will get into a variety of different issues. And so that's what makes this thing so fascinating from a political observation standpoint.
So, Orson, this is not normal in that we are facing an election where normally someone wins and the country moves on. Right. Donald Trump repeatedly saying if he doesn't win, he won't accept that result. What could that look like? How far can he actually take that?
Well, it depends on what the results are. I mean, to keep in mind that nearly 23 million Americans have already voted. In the battleground states, maybe 10 million or so folks have already voted. If the turnout is as high as it is, this election may not be as close as advertised as we saw in the last election. So if it's a close election, his argument is a little bit more sustained. But if it's an election where one of these candidates starts to tilt in favor of being the victor, then I don't think all of the hype about what the transition will be as bad as people think.
But John, he's really instilled such a lack of faith in the system for his supporters. It seems like whatever the result, whether it's close or whether it's a landslide for Harris, they're not going to accept it. They will think that something has gone wrong with this and that there's something fishy about it.
Well, let me also posit, there was a story that Molly Ball wrote about 2020. If the election had gone to Trump in 2020, there was going to be demonstrations in the streets in an effort to take the election from Trump, from the left. So both sides have dirty hands in this process.
Yeah, but one side has very much refused to say that the 2020 election was legitimate.
Well, yeah, that's because they lost. And of course, if you look at Hillary Clinton, she said that Vladimir Putin stole the election in 2020. She said that continuously in 2016.
She did.
Well, so did Trump. Trump ultimately conceded. We had a peaceful transition, despite what happened on January 6th. And Trump, we have Joe Biden as president. It's very hard for someone to acknowledge that they lost. And we see that with lots of different candidates.
But it's especially hard for Trump. I mean, where could we be? Are we going to see violence here in D.C.?
Well, we saw violence in 2016. We saw much more violence in 2016 than we saw I was here in 2016, and I saw what Antifa did. They destroyed stores. There was
no insurrection. Are you worried about violence, Orson?
Not necessarily worried about violence, because I firmly believe that this election will break one way or the other. If it ends up like Al Gore and Bush, and the Supreme Court makes a decision, then that's a completely different story, and you will see major protests throughout the country, and I would be worried about that. But I truly believe in the last 7 days or so of this election, you're going to see one of these candidates kind of break through, and of course, the country is divided. People are going to be upset, but I don't see violence as an end result if there's a election that has a candidate winning by a sizable amount.
I totally agree with that. I think it's going to break one way or the other, and I think that all this talk about violence in the streets is kind of media hype, to be honest with you.
Even based on what happens,
especially
at the Capitol building.
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep in mind what happened in 2020. I mean, we had violence in the streets all throughout 2020. We had people that were cooped up, people that were extremely angry, and we also had titanic security failures. I don't think we're going to see that again. I think that the security plans are in place to make sure that doesn't happen again, and I don't think most Americans want to see that happen.
Looking back to 2020, there was a sense that Trump had his day, and here we are now in an incredibly tight race in 2024. Is the Republican Party, John, of Romney, Reagan, is it officially dead now? Is Trump and Trumpism the future of the Republican Party?
I would say this. I would say that the party of George W. Bush and the Bush family is dead. I think it's been dead ever since the financial crisis and the failed Iraq War and the failed response. I think you saw that because George Bush's vice president endorsed Donald Trump. Romney, McCain, you can go through that, but that was a failed Republican Party that, frankly, had not won the popular vote. The last one to really win the popular vote was George H.W. Bush. So, yeah, that party's dead, but I don't think the party of Ronald Reagan is dead. I think that Ronald Reagan would see a lot in Donald Trump that he likes. But
really?
Definitely the party, yes, I totally believe that. But I do think that the party of the Bushes is dead, and we've moved on from that. And largely because when people forget, George W. Bush, when he left office, his approval rating was 28%. The reason why we had Barack Obama win a huge landslide was because George Bush was so incredibly unpopular because he made some really dumb decisions, And and I've worked in that administration. I worked with that administration. It was a failed administration. That's dead, and we have the Trump party is alive.
Okay, Austin, just finally with you, we've had Kamala Harris enter in exceptional circumstances.
Yes.
Has she done a good job in this very unusual situation?
I think she's done an outstanding job. The mere fact in the last quarter of fundraising, she's raised $1 billion. She's put a team together in states that I think will do pretty well. You're seeing it with these early vote turnouts. She's picked a VP candidate that they seem to have hit their stride. So under the circumstances, she's done everything right. Now it really turns out to a ground game of who's going to get their voters out, and the machine that each team has put together is going to be put to a test. So it isn't necessarily all on the candidate. It's on these folks running these battleground states and these big cities and rural areas on will they do their job, because I think she's done a great job of being a candidate.
Awesome, John, thank you both so much. So by our next show, we should be able to stop speculating and actually discuss an actual result and what it means for America and the rest of the world. We'll see you on the other side on Inside America.